graduation for her master's, which she's going to start this September, that she basically ruined every intern at the Albright because she was the best. So I'm glad that she recommended me for this as well. So if you're familiar with the theme, or with the Creative Mornings, there's always this theme. And so the theme that I was challenged with thinking about was beyond. And so what I've titled this talk is Beyond Your Bubble. How getting your bubble burst and going beyond your comfort zone is a difficult but necessary experience for creative capacity. Now, when I first thought about beyond, I thought, the thing that made a lot of sense to me is what it means to be a curator of public art. So very naturally, it means to go beyond the museum. It means to go beyond the museum walls, and it means to deal with audiences that are outside of what we normally encounter. Now, the Albright Knox is the 6th oldest museum in the United States of America. It is the oldest museum dedicated solely to modern and contemporary art. So we are the oldest at what we do. And consequently, there are works like this. This is Jackson Pollock's Convergence in our collection that are icons of contemporary work. They define what we do, and they are known the world around as important pieces of work. But many people may not recognize Jackson Pollock, they might not jump and go like, this is the one from the Albright Knox. And this is a little hard to see, but those of you who have driven by the Albright Knox are going to recognize the canoes, right? The Nancy Reagan's piece. And I would argue that that piece has become as iconic as any in the collection, and the reason is because it's in the public sphere. It's because you drive by it, you don't have to pay to go see it, you can refer to it as the canoes, even though it's not its name, it's got this wildly complicated name. And that's fine, and I actually encourage that. This is not a piece that I helped curate, this is a piece that was done before I arrived. But it's important to note that this piece was placed, I think, in 2011 or 2012. So in that short span of time, right, the Pollock was purchased in 1956. So in 5 years, basically, this work has become as iconic as any in the collection. And it's because of the way in which it is beyond the museum walls. And it's worth thinking about why that's important and how that functions for people. One of the first pieces that I did was a project called You Are Beautiful by Matthew Hoffman. And I bring it up today because it sort of cuts to the core of my own personal curatorial philosophy, which I always say is grounded in generosity. Generosity, I know, is a vague word, but we sort of know it when we see it. And I think when a sign says you are beautiful, you feel it. It's a participatory piece. It comes in a couple different forms. There's stickers, and we've given out almost 100,000 stickers to date. There have been over 2 million shared on all continents with this project, and so we're excited to be a part of that. But another form that it came in was these billboards. We did 44 billboards throughout Erie and Niagara County. And when I say participatory, work that I'm interested in, participation can take all kinds of different forms, right? And the way that this was participatory was in certainly the sharing of stickers and the way it pops up, and many of you will see those stickers on the back of phones, probably in this room today, or you'll see them around the city. But there's participation that happens in the sharing of these stories. And what we heard a lot was, especially from parents, they'd write me an email and it would say, I was driving along and my son and my daughter said, Mom, Daddy, why does that sign say you are beautiful? And then they'd write me a little note about what they said, and they'd say, did I get it right? And it doesn't matter what they said. Of course they got it right. The mere fact that they're talking about contemporary art, contemporary public art, and not even thinking about having shields up, having guards up. They're not questioning themselves to think about, are they smart enough? How do they know the philosophy of public art or art at all? They're just sharing in that experience, which I like. And through that sharing, it gets to the next point that I like to produce in my curation, and that's self-authorship and self-ownership. So this is work where, again, the stories those people told themselves are valid because those stories are valid. And as they share them with each other, the project begins to feel more and more like their own, rather than something that is owned by the Albright. This is hard to see, but you've all seen Shark Girl. Shark Girl was sort of an accidental icon, but I have this image, which is also hard to see, but this is Shark Girl in a snowstorm. And so when we talk about going beyond museum walls, this is one of the things that we really have to think about, and this is why we can't go take a picture with Shark Girl right now, because she's at the Conservators for the next 2 or 3 weeks, because she gets beat up by Buffalo, even though Buffalo loves her. But so when we go beyond those museum spaces, when we go beyond those museum walls, we have to think about the consequences of the work that we produce. Sometimes the work that we produce, like Shark Girl and like this work with Amanda Browder, it takes a life of its own. And what we did with Amanda Browder is we covered 3 buildings in Buffalo with these community quilts that were put together with donated fabric and sewn by volunteers in the city. And these are all images from Instagram, and they're a little hard to see, but the point is that none of these photographs are taken by the Albright. These are images that are taken by the public. These are images that are shared by the public. These are images that people wanted other people to see about how they were interacting with their spaces, what public art meant to them. And it's not like these individuals walked around or are walking around today thinking like, I really need to see some public art today, right? They're not thinking about that in their daily lives, but when they encounter something that is disruptive in a really great way, they begin to share it, they begin to think about it. Another slide that's hard to see, but what I'm showing here is another aspect of my curation, my curatorial history, is that I have a very good track record working with female artists. Over half the artists that I have exhibited at the Albright are female, and if you look at my career, you're going to see that same kind of balance. The reason that's, I mean, to me, it's like a non-issue. I don't actually think about it that much, but it's important to note because it is unusual in the curatorial world. If we look at museums, if we look at galleries, it is going to skew white and male, right? That's a reality of the system as it's built right now, and it's a problem. I've always been proud of the fact that I've been able to exhibit women artists at the level that I have. It always felt very natural to me. Now, there's a number of ways in which we can sort of, be armchair philosophers about this. It could be that I was raised by my mother and by my sister. It could be that I married an artist. It could be that, I have all these strong female influences in my life, and it's not really an issue. But I think that says something about the way in which I have a worldview, right? Because while this is a definitive strength of mine, one of the weaknesses in my curatorial practice are artists of color. I have not exhibited a lot of African American artists, not because I'm not trying to, but because it had seemed, up until recently, that it wasn't presented to me. And I allow that to be something of a systemic problem. This is an image of a bubble. I was in a bubble. And what I was in is I was in this comfortable space where I could acknowledge, I'm a progressive individual, I could acknowledge that the system is set up against people of color, right? It's set up against opportunities from early ages in terms of access, in terms of materials, in terms of education, that deny persons of color the system itself, right? It pushes people out. And it means that the pool of people that we're looking at is automatically smaller, and I just would say, well, the pool that I'm looking at is automatically smaller. I'm doing public art, and public art oftentimes needs really robust materials, and it's really expensive, and maybe these other artists of color have never cut their teeth in that way. And I came up with a lot of justifications that allowed me to continue on my trajectory, which was very positive and progressive with respect to exhibiting female artists, but not artists of color. Now, recently, I bring this up because we began a project, and I can already feel that this is a bubble that I'm in right now, that frankly I need to pop as I've been thinking about this. Because so much of what I do at the Albright is team-based, right? And we have a ritual in the evenings where we hold hands and we say what we're grateful for. And oftentimes, I say that I'm grateful for the people who help me do my job. And it really is a team effort at the Albright. So I say we a lot, but this I think I need to own. So this is a project that I was developing, and I don't have images because it's still in development. But we were developing a project over at the corner of Michigan and Ferry And because of the space of the project, we developed it with civil rights content in mind. It's at the entrance into the northern entrance into the Michigan Street African American Heritage Corridor. It's directly across the street from Bethel A&E, which is the oldest black church in Buffalo. It's right down the street from the Performing Visual Arts School. It's a block in from Main Street, which is this historic divide between white and black in the city of Buffalo. And I've been cautioned by a number of people to choose an artist for specific reasons. And one of the things that we were considering was because we wanted to put civil rights leaders on this wall. There's a big 300-foot retaining wall there. It's divided into 28 sections, so it lends itself to portraiture. Well, choose somebody who has great facility with portraiture. So we did. And that person was not an African-American individual. Now, I had spoken with some people that I trusted in the African-American community. But what happened was, while we chose the artist, I did not feel authorized to choose the content, that is the subjects. Who should be depicted on this wall? That felt like something we should reach out to the community and discuss. We should try and figure out what that lived experience is like, especially for individuals that live on the east side of Buffalo, who live in these in spaces that are predominantly African American, and hear from them. Well, the first thing that I heard, in no uncertain terms, was, we'll talk to you about content, but you need to listen about opportunities. You need to listen about opportunities in this city for artists of color, specifically African American artists, who the alt-right or many institutions are not looking at. It was a very difficult reality for me to face because we caught a lot of heat at these public meetings. People were upset with us. And it was interesting because I had people come up to me afterwards and they'd say things like this, trying to make me feel better. They'd say, well, you know, a lot of that wasn't about you. And I'd say, yeah, I know, but it's about something. And it's about something that this work we're doing is about, and we have to address it, right? And so, after two very difficult and very heated public meetings, we sort of took a look at that project and realized that there was no way forward for us, that there was no way that we were going to move forward in a healthy manner without making amendments to the project. And part of that community input was built in the project. We wanted feedback, and we didn't expect the kind of feedback that we got, but it was important for us to hear, and it was important for us to make amendments to the project. Now, the interesting thing to me as I was getting my bubble burst was the way in which these conversations have really helped me stay aware and think about the spaces that I'm in, think about the kind of creative culture that we are collectively producing, think about the systems that deny artists of color their space in that realm, and not just to think about it, but to act on it, right? So it's humbling. We were in a very, we put ourselves in kind of a vulnerable situation with these public meetings, but I think being vulnerable and being humble are really, really valuable spaces to learn, right? And when you mix into that empathy, when you begin to understand why people are saying the things that they're saying to you, and not just understand them, but empathize with them, you begin to realize where and how you can make effective change, right? Because I think that the difference between being in your bubble and recognizing that there's a systemic problem, and having that bubble burst and recognizing that now no longer are you in that comfortable space, but you have to act outside of that bubble in order to affect change. It can be uncomfortable, but that's the space where you begin to really make a difference, right? And so I think that it's worth talking about pretty much in any scenario. So I was mentioning today, like if we look around this room, the room that we're in, I can count the African American individuals on one hand. Why is that? Now there's a number of reasons why that may be, and we can probably come to a consensus on what the problems are and the ways in which we might want to move forward. But if we don't move forward, then we're guilty of staying inside our bubbles, right? That's the filter that happens. You can look outside that bubble, it's clear, sure, and the information comes in, it might get filtered a little bit, but unless you get it burst, man, there's no way for you to affect change. And the thing about creative individuals, right, we can look at these systems in ways that most people don't, right? We can say, so it's mind-bending to me that we have gotten such a positive response now from the same community that had given us such a negative response. Only because we have gone to this community with changes and they said things like this: well, we didn't think you'd make change. I said, well, why? You came to me, you were clearly upset. We understood why that was happening. We felt like this is what you asked for. Why are you surprised about that? Well, again, they're surprised because that's not the way it usually works. Usually, when a project is brought to the east side, and community meetings are held, what happens is, if the community doesn't like it, either it gets pushed forward with, or people retreat. And that is the status quo. And what we did is disrupt that. We didn't know we were being disruptive to that status quo, but it's what we were doing. And it's a really exciting moment for us because it's not only laid the groundwork for us in a initially frustrating and painful way, now into a healthy space where we can move, but it's given us the information that we need to move forward on projects and how we can start with those projects, how we can listen from the beginning in order to provide communities with what they really need, and not be presumptuous about them. Because it's easy to say, well, of course I wanted to produce a wall with 28 civil rights leaders on it, because we should be talking about civil rights. There's, maybe not since the 60s has there been a time that's maybe been so prescient to talk about civil rights, right? But just talking about it is not, especially when you're talking about it tone deaf, whether it's intentional or not, that's not going to be a solution. That's not going to be a path forward. And the community's feedback was really essential for us to create a better piece. And so now that the original artist is going to stay on that wall, but it's being joined by 3 other local African-American artists who've made some significant changes to that piece, and not just in the execution, but in the programming of it. So I'm really thrilled about what that has done. But I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight today is that getting your bubble burst can be painful and it can be scary, and because those bubbles, those are comfort zones for us. But if we allow our bubbles to get burst, and you kind of open your eyes, and again, you use that vulnerability and that humility and that empathy as a way to really truly come together, it'll change your perspective. And you'll be able to, as creative individuals, to produce more and better work for your clients, for your community, for yourself, in a way that is more inclusive. I think that, there's a lot of people, I think one of the questions we asked today was, when's the last time you got your bubble burst? And sometimes our bubbles burst in little ways, sometimes they burst in big ways. I mean, this experience for me, I can think of maybe one other time where I have, in the moment, felt my curatorial philosophy shifting as much as what has happened recently. I am more aware that I'm standing in a white room than I would have been a month ago. I'm more aware when I see on Facebook. Today there was an article that was printed about, it was like the inner circle, and someone showed it, and it was a line of white men. And these are the people who are supposed to be affecting change in our community. I'm not saying that what I'm saying is that we need to be aware of that, and we can't just say that it's a problem. We have to find solutions to that problem. We have to say, in a city that's 40% African American, why in the world would a line of white men be what changes this community, right? And that can be challenging for an individual like me. I have a mirror, I'm a white man, right? I know this about myself. And I think, as a white ally for issues that confront African Americans in particular, it has taken getting my bubble burst in order to truly understand how I can be an ally. Me just feeling my feelings and being progressive and thinking about how I can affect change is not enough. I need the perspective of lived experience in African American communities. I need to hear those voices. We need to hear them together. And one of the things that I want to say is that It's been really helpful for me to talk to people with no agenda, to just listen, because you start hearing things that either A, you would never have heard in the first place, or B, you've heard but haven't truly heard. I'll give an anecdote. I know I'm going a little over time here, but when talking to an individual a couple months back, she explained a lived experience that I've since found pretty much every African American has, and that is that is basically being followed in a store. Go to a bookstore, go to a drugstore, go somewhere. You've got somebody following you, whether it's an employee, whether it's a store manager, whatever. This is not something that I knew about, right? That's how blind white privilege can make people, because I didn't, not only did I know about it, but here's another fundamental question is, how could I have asked what that experience is like? How could I have formulated a question about it, not knowing that it existed, right? That's a problem, because now that I talk to African American people, are like, yeah, that happens to everybody, right? So the issue is that white people, we got to talk to black people. We got to talk, and we got to talk with no agenda in order to try and figure out what's going on, so that we can get to these spaces where we can say, that ain't right. How do we find the solution to this? How do we fix this, right? And so I'll end today. I said tonight, because we were just talking in the morning. There's a Ben Franklin quote, and I'll butcher it, so don't let this be the Winnie back quote, because it's Ben Franklin. But he said that, essentially, I'll paraphrase, that justice will never occur until those who are unaffected by a situation are as outraged as those who are, right? That's hard work. It's easy to not be outraged about stuff that affects other people. That's where empathy is essential. That's where vulnerability is essential. That's where humility is essential. You have to be able to talk to people, listen to them, and understand their experiences, and then get as pissed off as they are, because they got reason to be pissed off. And you should be pissed off because justice won't happen until you are, right? And this is why some of that anger and that frustration, that's positive. That can educate you. And I'm telling you, woke is work, man. You have to work at it. You have to figure out how it is that you can stay active in terms of how you learn, how you talk, how you listen in order to affect change, right? And I think that creative individuals are uniquely capable of doing that and then taking it out into the real world and making it